I'd like to call to order the Committee of the Whole for Wednesday, September 22nd, 2021. Our first item of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our next order of business is the approval of minutes for August 25th, 2020. I'm sorry, roll call. I skipped it. Thank you. Go ahead, Chad.
Alder Allen.
Present.
Alder Arata Frada.
Here.
Alder Gerhart is absent with excuse. Alder Herbst.
Here.
Alder Maldonado.
Here.
Mayor Richardson.
Here.
Alder Strassman.
Here.
Alder Udell.
Present.
Alder Wheeler.
Here.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Our next order of business is the approval of minutes for August 25th, 2021, draft minutes.
I move approval.
Second.
All right. Very good. Discussion. Hearing none, I'll place it to a vote. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
The ayes have it. Next item of business, public appearances for non-agenda items. I don't see anybody in chambers at this point. Anybody on Zoom? No, sir. All right. There are no one on Zoom either, so we'll move on to item 6, agenda items. This evening we have the first item is special assessment processes and procedures, and Bill Balke, our Director of Public Works, will present, and I'll turn the floor over to you, Bill.
I'm on. Thank you. Tonight I'd like to discuss our processes and procedures for special assessments. This has been a policy that Fitchburg has had since 1997. And special assessments, if you go back in the minutes for the town boards, those go back to 1920s. So this is a process that the city has used, or the village and town, or the town at the time had used over the years to defer some of the costs to the city from the taxpayers whenever there's a special benefit to the properties along the project limits. So tonight I'd just like to go over what our policies and procedures manual is, the authority that we have to assess for property or for projects, and solicit any questions and input that we could use to improve on our process. But back in 2013, a committee was put together to really look at the details of this process and this is one of the most involved processes that I've ever seen in my tenure at the city and the other communities that I've been involved with. So it really does it has been thought out, and we'd like to try to stick to it as much as possible, but like you said, there's always room for improvements, and we're looking to get that input back from you. So I got a quick presentation that I can go through for tonight. If I could figure out how to get it to advance on me. There we go. So under Wisconsin statutes, it does provide that special assessments can be levied against benefiting properties, and for a portion of the project or the majority of the project that's within the project area. Fitchburg has a local ordinance in place under Chapter 10, Division 3 of the ordinance, that provides for the city to levy special assessments for projects, and the policy that we have that's been put in place has been implemented or has been around since 2013 with the last revision. And it's a very well thought out process. So for the policies and procedures, we're under statutory requirement to do certain things. One of them is to publish a preliminary resolution to a special assess. That's basically the council authorizing the city staff to go forward and prepare a report to assess portions of a project toward the benefiting properties. Within that preliminary resolution, we have to identify that we are going to special assess under Wisconsin statutes the purpose of the assessments, such as what the project is going to be for. We're going to be installing sidewalk along Sherrill Drive between Fish Hatchery Road and Richardson, for instance. We have to set the limits of where this project is going to be assessed. We have to provide within there the number of installments that are allowed. Within our policy here, we have a 5-year, typically a 5-year assessment term where the assessments will be divided up over the years. And we establish what the interest rate would be for that, and that we're going to be setting a date for a public hearing. The city clerk publishes a notice in the paper indicating that we're going to have a preliminary or a special assessment and a public hearing. So those are all the things that go into a preliminary assessment for the notice to intent or intent to special assess. So the preliminary notice indicates that it directs the city engineer to prepare a special assessment report. And in there, we go through and determine what all the project costs are, the properties that are going to be assessed, how the method of assessment that we're going to be using, such as a linear foot. So we come up with a cost for that. We apply our policies that we have in our policy manual to that to make sure that it's fair and equitable to properties. And then we also publish the project or the public hearing notice. I'm sorry, before the projects are let. When we go through and within the engineer's report, again, we scope out what the project is for, how much it's going to cost, which elements are to be specially assessed, whether it's just for a water main, the water main and services, how that's going to be assessed. And as mentioned, that we go through and identify each of the properties that are going to be assessed and how much those properties will be assessed. We have the public hearing just prior to the bids being let for the project. And the reason that we do it at that time is so that the council can approve the project with the bids and the intent to assess the property owners as well. Just prior to the approval of the construction contracts, the Board of Public Works will review the rolls. The public will come in and give comment on those rolls and the costs associated with that. And then we would ask, the Board of Public Works to approve the contracts as well as the rolls. So after the preliminary assessment and the project report is approved, we don't have the final costs for the final resolution for until all of the project costs the project is complete and we have all the project costs. Then we would assign those project costs for the final resolution and make sure that it's within 10% of the total project preliminary assessment. If it is, we would assign those rolls to be invoiced out to the property owners. And then if it's not, we would have to have another public hearing to determine whether or not the city was going to assume those additional costs or assess those additional costs to the property owners for the project. So typically, you know, we would wait until we get the bids in to do the preliminary assessments, so we don't know those final costs or the preliminary costs until we get the bids in, so that we can have a good, accurate estimate for the final assessments as well. We can go in ahead of time, estimate high, and then if it comes in lower at the end, you know, all the project costs come in lower at the end. It just creates a lot of heartache knowing that the estimates might be higher than what the actual project costs are. So we would tend to be more on the accurate side to be fair and honest with the property owners that would be assessed, that these are close to what those final costs are going to be. As mentioned with the final resolution, once we get all the final costs in, we will go through and have the final public hearing for and approve the final resolution. The city clerk will publish a notice in the paper that the final resolution was issued, and then at that time, residents would still have a 40-day period to appeal any assessments, final assessments that are being recommended for determination. We have quite a few different areas that we assess for within the city. One of them would be street improvements, like for local roads. New local roads, if they are assessed, would be assessed at 100% to the adjoining property owners. A project like this would be what we're doing over in the Uptown Crossing area, Nine Springs, over by East Sherrill, where Central Park Place is being extended, where it goes from Lacey to Sain Road, essentially. That new road there is being 100% assessed back to the adjoining property owners as a regional road as part of the development. We were directed to put that road in ahead of time. So we bid the project, we put it out for bids, we had the special assessment hearing, and these costs are being associated or assessed back to the property owners 100% because it's a new road, new development. Resurfacing roads we don't assess for, it's considered maintenance. So we do assess for widening of roads, and if the council directs, this would be a project cost that we could do for like Sain Road, where we're taking a rural road, converting it into an urban road, widening it, putting in additional costs. We do not have that as proposed right now, but that would be a for instance. It's just the direction that we were given previous, that we were not going to be assessing for the regional road, but this would be one that could be assessed for a project. The original replacement of driveways and aprons are another area that we typically would assess for. So if we're going by doing a resurfacing, the apron is cracked, the sidewalk is cracked associated with that, those costs would be 100% assessed back to the property owner. New sanitary laterals and new sewer mains are assessed to property owners, as well as water mains and laterals. Sanitary and storm facilities, such as lift stations or pump stations or large ponds, you know, regional areas, is something that we would assess back to the property owner, to a regional basis for connection. The connection charges that we recently approved for the Sain Road interceptor and the Terravessa interceptors and lift station, those are regional connection charges that we assess back to the property owners or the development at the time those charges are established. New sidewalk and sidewalk replacement is another area that we would assess for. New, I think that's an area that we need to take a look at in a little more closer detail with our policy. That was written in 2013. It does have an area in there that refers back to the bicycle and pedestrian plan. And new sidewalks that are in the bicycle pedestrian plan would not be assessed to the property owners. But we don't have any new sidewalk proposed in the current pedestrian bicycle plan. So that's something that, you know, the policy needs to be updated to reflect our current bicycle pedestrian plan and how we should assess for that. Curb and gutter is another area that we would assess for. And it's all laid out in the policy. There's a lot of details as to how much of the curb and gutter is assessed, the percentages, the length, et cetera. So on a front foot method is typically what we would use for things like curb and gutter and sidewalk. You take the total project cost for those elements, divide it up by the number of feet in the frontage for each of the properties, and you would get assessed a per foot cost based upon the lot frontage you have in front of your lot. As you can see, you know, some of the lots are smaller than others, so it's not exactly equal. If you have a longer lot, or I guess it would be more equitable instead of fair, that, you know, larger lots have a larger assessment. Area methods, similar to the per foot, you take, for instance, a lot area and divide the project cost by a lot area. And we would use those in something like a drainage issue. There's an area that drains into a specific development or a stormwater project, and to divide that cost up by the area of contribution to the stormwater. Lots or connection methods. It's similar to the area, but everybody is assessed equally. It's the most fair of the methods, but again, you know, smaller lots are paying just as much as the biggest lot that's there, and sometimes that's not always equitable. There is no good right way or wrong way to do this. It's how you look at it. If you have a tiny lot or a tiny frontage, you're paying just as much as somebody with a big frontage or a big lot. So we've got that. Benefit zones are similar to the lot area, where if we have a pond at the end of a street, you know, that everybody would be contributing their fair share based upon the areas that they have closer to that improvement. When we do have in our assessment policy the preferred method for assessments, for example, curb and gutter sidewalks, we would want to do the per foot area, sidewalks, alleys, storm sewer. So there are preference for the most common to the least common that we use for when we determine what kind of assessments to implement. Communication outreach is something that I wanted to touch on. We do try to get the project or the special assessment notices out to properties anytime there's an assessment contemplated within the 10-year capital improvement plan. For instance, if we know 7 or 8, 9 years out down the road, we're going to be installing a water main on a project, and we list part of the benefit as being recovered by special assessments, they'll get a notice. But it's essentially that they'll get a letter saying that we've got a project in a capital improvement plan, and there's a pending assessment for that project. You're invited to come into the public hearing for the capital improvement plan and speak your mind. I think that's something that, you know, we can probably do a little bit better, you know, outreach on that, just to explain the projects a little bit better, so that people kind of have a, you know, an understanding about what an assessment is. Maybe some more information, you know, in that CIP process that we can do to make sure that people are getting an understanding of what the project is, why it's needed. It's just going to involve a little bit more, staff time on the front end to make sure that we have those letters to explain the key points of what's coming up and why it's important. Prior to the special assessment, we're required to send, or we do send out a project letter similar to what's required in the preliminary assessment roles that we send out. But the project letter says essentially what the project is all about, why we're doing it, that there's a special assessment. It explains the special assessment process. When that they will be receiving a special assessment letter and a role and what it's about and inviting them to the public hearing. So I guess what happened this year with the project that we had for Sain Road was, it was a combination of multiple factors that came together to create a storm, sort of, that the letters that we would typically send out for explaining the process occurred just before we sent out the letters for the special assessments. And with the mail system, they kind of got overlapped with each other. With COVID, we've had some issues with mail trying to get across town. Sometimes it would take 5-6 days, and those letters just kind of got mixed up in the mail as well. So some people were getting the letters explaining the assessment process after they were getting the rolls, or after they were getting the roll letters and the invitation for the public hearing. So it, again, I think, timing-wise, I think we can work on that process to make sure that we space those out a little bit better so that they, but not to get them so far apart that, they lose interest or forget about, the letters coming out. So we do the preliminary assessment rolls. We send those to the property owners 10 days prior to the public hearing. That's required by statute that we do that. And then, that's pretty much the impact that we have, up through construction. So after construction occurs, then we send out the final resolution for special assessments after it's sent to through the council for approval. And then the invoices would go out after that. So if we have a construction completion of September, October this year, we wouldn't send those out until we final out the project, which would be probably in the spring. And then the property owners would see their final assessment bill the December following. I think that's right, Misty, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. So I just wanted to leave a lot of time for questions and answers and input for the council right now.
With that said, I'd like to open it up to the public for discussion. Now, I only have one registration here, and I believe it's for the second half of our evening. Are there, and I noticed several other people walked in. Is there anybody else that would like to speak and like to register for this topic? And I didn't see any hands, so I will close the public discussion and open it up for discussion with the alders. I guess before I do that, though, maybe we receive a copy of this presentation as well?
Sure.
Okay, if you could forward on to all of us, and that would be terrific to have. Questions? Yes, Alder Herbst, go ahead.
Not really a question, more a comment. One thing, I was on the board in 2013, I was on in 97, and one thing we've strived to do is be consistent with this policy. No one likes an assessment. I certainly understand it. I had to pay one when I bought my house for the Goose Lake pond. No one likes it, but we have to be consistent in administering it. It's not if we make an exception to someone on one that's upcoming, then all the people that paid in the past may come back and say, hey, wait a minute, you know, and so you open a can of worms. So it's our best policy to administer this as consistently as possible. It's the fairest to all our citizens. And I think we've done a pretty good job about being consistent with it. And we do have some flexibility, and we're not so big that we, you know, one size fits all, and there are options for payments and things like that. So that's all I wanted to say about it.
Very good, thank you, Alder Herbst. Additional questions? I see no one in chambers with a question. Anyone, Alder on Zoom? I see shaking of heads, so I guess we will close the discussion. And again, if we could receive a copy of that presentation, I think that would help us navigate through the process, Bill.
Sure.
I would like to thank you. You've been very informative, and I appreciate your time.
All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Moving on to item 6B, Curry Court and Old Indian Trail Stormwater Study. And Claudia Guy, our environmental project engineer, will speak to this, this study. And we do have Claudia online in Zoom. Claudia, the floor is yours.
All right, great. Thank you so much. I will go ahead and share my screen. We have a presentation here. All right, can folks confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So thank you for the opportunity to let us come and present the findings of the Curry Court and Old Indian Trail watershed study with you. I'd like to introduce Anne Marie Kirsch, who is joining me today. She is the project manager for this project with AE2S. And I am Claudia Guy. I'm the environmental engineer for the city of Fitchburg. Just a quick outline of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to start with a history of flooding in this neighborhood. We're going to talk about public engagement and input that we've received from the public on this project. Then I'm going to turn it over to Anne Marie Kirsch to go over the alternatives that we considered, as well as the cost and benefits that we're expecting to see from those alternatives. Oh, I apologize, one second. And then we're going to move on to recommendations and next steps. So just to start with some flooding, some history of the flooding in this area. The primary study area included Curry Court, which is on the east side of Fitchburg, south of Irish Lane, along South Scion Road there. So this included Curry Court and Old Indian Trail, as well as Gold Addition Park. And this was really the area that we were trying to understand what the current problems are in this area and what could feasibly be done to improve the identified problems. So one thing that we heard is that there are some structures on this road that do flood during heavy rainfall events, as well as flash flooding of the street. So these are some photographs of that. You can see on the right-hand side there's a shed which has, in this photograph, several inches of water in it. And on the left-hand side, one of the buildings on the north side of Curry Court has water going up to its front door. And on that south picture there, this is actually the roundabout here. You can't really tell because it's underwater, but that is flooding that occurs on the street of Curry Court. Another thing that we heard is areas that have continuously wet ditches. And here are some photographs of what that looks like. It's just ditches that are constantly wet. In addition, there's a culvert that goes underneath Old Indian Trail, and it doesn't drain. So there's localized ponding on either end of the culvert, which historically drained to the south, but that drainage route has since been blocked off. It's just been filled in by previous owners who lived in that area. And this is what that looks like. You can see that there is this kind of lime green color. That's actually water. And it's that color because there's algae. That is an indication that water has been standing there for a very long time. So typically, if you have water that goes to an area and then flows away pretty quickly, that water will look relatively clear versus if it really is ponding there for a very long time, you will see algae like this start to form. Also, we heard one resident who was dealing with flooding in their backyard due to lack of positive drainage away from their yard. And flooding in the park as well due to flat ditches and areas, high groundwater, and also sedimentation within those ditches. And it's become a problem. This is an area that the park staff maintained in the past, but because it's so wet, it hasn't been possible to get mowers back there, at least for the last few years, because the mowers get stuck or would get stuck if we tried to. And here's just a photograph of what that looks like. You can see the green algae again, indicating that this water really is ponding there and not moving very quickly. So in terms of public engagement, we had a public information meeting earlier this year to introduce the project and to also solicit input regarding existing problems as well as input regarding potential solutions. So we wanted to make sure that we had a clear understanding of all of the problems that are here, as well as asking residents to provide input on if they had ideas for solutions as well. After that project, we proceeded to pick alternatives and then move forward with the analysis of those alternatives. And then we had public information meeting number 2 to review the study results with residents. The pumping station wasn't included at that time because that was a change order since then. And based on that public information meeting, we heard a lot of negative feedback on the sump pump collection system alternative. So we sent another survey following that meeting to get additional input from residents who would be impacted by that, just to see if the people who came to the meeting, you know, if that was the general consensus of the people who lived in that area. And Anne Marie will talk about the results of that in more detail later. And then of course, today we're coming to the committee of the whole to review the study results and solicit feedback on next steps. So just going over some of the survey results from that first public information meeting, we had 16 people respond. About 2/3 of them were on South Sayin Road, about 1/4 from Old Indian Trail, and the rest were from other locations. Unfortunately, we didn't have any respondents from Curry Court itself, but we did have 16, which is a very good number. And a lot of those people, you can see in the second graph here, have lived in the area for a very long time. So 2/3 said they've been there for more than 15 years. Another thing that we asked as part of this survey was if folks have a sump pump and how frequently does that sump pump run. So you can see here that we have people who, oh, and sorry, let me continue with explaining what these symbols are. So the circle that's filled in entirely is a sump pump that runs daily or more frequently. A lot of people who chose daily actually added a comment saying it's every 5 minutes, if it's every minute. So it's really constant. It's not once a day it kicks on, it's going constantly. So So the filled-in circle is either daily or more frequently than that. If it has a ×2, that means that the house, the survey respondent indicated that their house has 2 sump pumps. If it's a circle that's not filled in, they have a sump pump, but it does not run frequently. Sorry. And if it's a yellow circle, there's no sump pump at the property, presumably because they don't need one. So you can see along South Sayin Road, we have several houses that do have sump pumps that run very frequently, some that have even 2 sump pumps, presumably because the issue is severe enough that you would want to have a backup. And then also over here, these 2 respondents who were adjacent to the park said that they have sump pumps that run continuously. A couple folks said that they have sump pumps, but they don't run often. These 2 homes are slightly higher in elevation. And then once you get over the hill on South Sayin going south, these houses don't seem to have issues with groundwater at all. Another question that we asked was, what was the level of concern regarding impact to your property? And about half said it was a major concern, a quarter said moderate, and the rest said minor or not at all. I thought it would be interesting to see where those people were located. And one thing that I noticed when looking at this is that it seemed to correlate, at least the people who said they had a major concern seemed to be the folks who have sump pumps that run continuously. So at least in my mind, one of the biggest problems is sump pumps that run continuously. And you would presume soggy ditches that result from the sump pumps that are running continuously. We also asked folks for input on what they thought the best solution would be for flooding problems in the area. The most common response was, folks really didn't know or have insight into what might be a solution. 2 people said keep all the drainage directed to the current locations, but improve conveyance. 1 person said divert drainage north to Swan Creek via gravity drainage. And then 4 people had additional responses, which were, 1 said gravity drainage, but they were unfamiliar with creeks. Another person said dredge ditching in the park to drain to the south from Old Indian Trail, hopefully alleviating some burden from Curry Court. Another person said consider running sanitary sewer to the area. And another person simply said not enough space to explain. So in addition to sending out that survey, we also, as part of public information meeting number 1, asked people to feel free to reach out if they had more insights that they wanted to share. So we did receive input from residents via email, phone calls, on-site meetings with residents throughout the neighborhood, if they reached out to us. And input included ideas regarding gravity drainage along South Sayin Road, ideas regarding gravity drainage along the railroad corridor through Mark Jones's property, ideas regarding drainage through the park, assistance reaching out to property owners east of the railroad tracks regarding potential ditch work. And then we also had meetings and input from stakeholders who we may need assessments from in order to implement some of these alternatives to gauge their level of interest in working with the city for a potential easement. And those folks included the property owner south of Old Indian Trail, the property owner at the end of Curry Court, and the property owner east of the railroad tracks. And then more recently, we sent out that sump pump collection survey, which again, Anne Marie will talk about in more detail later. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Anne Marie to discuss modeling. And I'll stop sharing my screen. And Anne Marie, you're muted, just so you know.
I'm always the first one to get you're muted. So let me share my screen and let me pick up where Claudia left off. So I'm going to talk about the technical aspect of this, and as soon as I get to my, here we go. And I'm going to talk the technical modeling and the hydrology and hydraulics of the area and the 8 different alternatives we've looked at so far. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about the modeling. And to put simply, we ran a pretty complex model called XP-SWIM 2D. And what that does is it evaluates how and where rainfall falls and how it collects in ponds at low spots. Where does it come from, go to, and where does it stay, and how deep does it get? So this is an example of some of the output that we get showing the ponding. And this is showing on the left the existing conditions modeling for what's called the 10-year storm event. And that's generally what we design storm sewers for in urban areas, 10% risk. And then on the right in the orange is one of the alternatives that we looked at. And the difficulty, and again, the darker the color, the deeper the ponding. So the darker the blue, the deeper the flooding, the deeper the orange, the deeper the flooding. But now when you look at these with your naked eye side by side, how do you tell the difference? How do you tell how effective an alternative is? Well, what we did is we looked at these images and put them on top of one another. So in this case, we've got one of the alternatives that we looked at, again, in the orange, laid on top of the blue. And where you can see these little fringes of blue around the edges, that's areas, and this is the maximum extent of flooding during the storm event. These are the areas that would have at one time become wet and now will be drier during the time of maximum flooding. And we also looked at this at different time stamps too, to say, well, what happens 2 hours after the peak of flooding, and what happens about 12 hours after the peak of flooding. So there are a couple of main topics that we want to talk about that kind of reflect how we can look at things. And the first is being conveyance. And that's the hydraulics of how water gets from one location to the other. And in this area, we have a lot of homes. We have rural section roadways without curb and gutter or storm sewer. So all the water either flows through ditches or through culvert pipes in some locations. So one of the issues that we have is where the homes are, the water tends to spread out because the topography, the land surface is so flat. So unlike behind like a roadway culvert or even behind sort of a dam or a detention pond, we can't effectively stack that water up to get water through more quickly. And we're also controlled by the creeks at the other end. So either Swan Creek or Murphy's Creek, those are fixed locations that we can't move. But sometimes people would say, well, what can we do to increase the conveyance? Well, let's put in a larger pipe or a larger ditch. But because we have such a limited ability to, quote, stack up the water, even if we put a bigger pipe in, we're not getting a lot more water through. And also, we would think about making a steeper pipe or ditch, but because of the grades, we're really limited. We can't dig down any lower because we've got the creeks at one end, and we can't raise the houses at the other end because those are our fixed elevation. So we also hear a lot about detention ponds, and we see them all over the city, especially associated with newer development. And the thought behind the pond is you've got water that runs off the watershed. And in agricultural or natural conditions, there's not as much water running off. And that just flows naturally to the downstream area. And this might be a creek, it might be a lake. Now, when you have development, everything just sort of runs at its natural rate, or I'm saying prior to development. But now when you put houses or developments in, that's where we start putting the ponds in, because as we build our houses and put more and more impervious surface down, our roadways, our rooftops, we get more water coming off our site. And that could affect the people downstream. They didn't have that much water before. So to put up, to kind of offset this increase in peak flow rate and volume, we'll often put in detention ponds, acts almost like a big bathtub storage area. So that takes the water in, and then that water starts to build up over time, and it's kind of providing that parking lot so we can release the rate at a controlled rate that's closer to what people downstream experienced beforehand. So the challenge that we have here, why do we have so many copies of this in here? Why am I going through? The challenge that we have in our location is that the neighborhood was built mostly in the 1950s and 60s, and it's pretty fully developed, except for the park. So there's really no space to put that pond upstream to help people that are maybe down at the bottom of the hill. And there's been talk about putting the pond in back in the park, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's now downstream of all the people who are impacted, the property owners. So that doesn't really help the people in the neighborhood. It might help Murphy's Creek, but it's not going to help the people living here. So let's talk about the alternatives that we looked at, and there are quite a few. One, first, we've heard a lot about Curry Court itself and ditch improvements. So at the start of this project, Claudia had some of the crew go out and actually take survey on site of the Curry Court ditch, going back to the crossing. And again, water comes across the street here at South Sayin Road. This ditch naturally flows east, 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 and then eventually goes through this neighborhood and off underneath the railroad tracks. The average ditch slope is around 0.6%. So that's very flat. 0.5% is really the flattest we would ever choose to design something. Excuse me, and some areas are slightly flatter and some are slightly steeper than that average. So there is some variability in between. Again, this is a profile if you're looking at Curry Court and you're looking at it from the south. So this would be Sayin Road over here. This would be the discharge point over here. And there's some kind of humps and bumps that cause local water to collect in between storm events. However, it tends to flow during storm events because, again, there's enough water behind it to kind of get over the hump. But to really improve the everyday drainage, and especially associated with the sump pumps, there would need to be some improvements in the grading of this ditch. So the idea would be to take out these humps and bumps and maybe reset the driveways. Bill was just talking about assessments earlier in the day, and because this is a benefit to the property owners, the driveway culvert replacements or resetting would likely be assessed 100% to the adjacent property owners. So this is sort of setting this up that because the ditch itself is at the, is within the city right of way, the city would have responsibility for maintenance of these ditches in terms of potential future dredging or sediment removal, but the property owner would be responsible for the driveway culvert itself. So again, this would provide marginal improvements, more for everyday events or the sump pump collection and keeping the water moving rather than pooling in low-lying areas. Again, this area sees a lot of water from sump pump discharge. So it's still going to see a supply of water that can impact the ditches and keep them wet, especially with poor drainage conditions in the soils. So the other thing we've talked about is a new ditch at the end of Curry Court. Right now, the water flows under the driveway at the east end of Curry Court. There's a little open area here, and then a second culvert goes underneath this driveway and parking area before it discharges into the existing culvert, the 3.5 foot by 3 foot box culvert under the railroad. One thing that we were talking about doing is possibly putting a ditch in and obtaining an easement from the property owner for a ditch or conveyance system south of the sheds. And the reason we look at doing that is while these pipes are currently in pretty decent condition structurally and don't seem to be clogged, the city doesn't have a maintenance easement or a stormwater easement for that location. So if things go poorly or if things happen, the city doesn't have the ability to go in and fix it or maintain it. However, if they secure the easement and relocate where the drainage goes, ultimately still draining underneath the railroad, there may be a benefit to both the property owners and the city. So the first major improvement that we looked at was also something that Claudia brought up that people talked about in the public information meeting, keeping the water where it's going, but just make it better. So this one looks at improving the conveyance that currently goes from Curry Creek northeast towards Swan Creek. So right here, this is an aerial photo, and this is from one of the wet years. This is the railroad under, or the culvert under the railroad. Here's Curry Court Railroad, and you see again a large green area here. This is a natural depressional wetland, and the water at this point is quite high, and it's obviously not moving well again because there's green and it's algae. And right here, there's an overflow elevation that's at about the same elevation as this railroad culvert. So we looked at what would happen if we could kind of take this knob out, or this high point, and do a better job of ditching north towards Irish Lane, where this water naturally flows, and potentially double the size of this railroad culvert. Here's a photo of the railroad culvert. I believe the year on this was constructed was 1898. Looking at the photo and the plaque over the top of it, you can see it's done out of cut stone. There is standing water in the culvert at the time the picture was taken. And this is a picture taken from the railroad tracks looking northeast over this wetland area. Again, you can see standing water. Water is impounded by this elevation about 914.5. So that's how high water needs to get before it can currently flow north towards Swan Creek. Why are my sun's getting out? Sorry, my apologies. So what the bottom line is, we looked at the modeling and there was literally no change in flooding extents or duration at the peak storm time, at the 2-hour point. Am I going backwards? Yes, I am, sorry. So marginal improvement for Curry Court flooding. And again, this is sort of the situation that we talked about earlier, is that even if you put a bigger structure in, we can't stack the water up higher behind it. So we're not getting much more water through. One of the situations too is working with a railroad can be very difficult. It's they own their own facilities and they don't like disruptions to their service. So installing a secondary culvert would be difficult for the city. And also this option would require significant downstream easement. And at this point, the landowner has not expressed interest in either granting or selling an easement for any improvements across their property. So at this point, this alternative is not under consideration because there's not really any benefit, and there's it's unlikely to be granted the easement. So the next project we looked at were the localized improvements at Old Indian Trail. This is what Claudia talked about with the ponding water on either side of Old Indian Trail. So this alternative considers adding a pipe along an easement. Again, we've opened conversations with the impacted property owner who has recently purchased this property, and then looking at cleaning out the ditches that go through Golds Park, and stabilizing the ditches, removing the sediment, doing all the permitting work that would need to be done to get that done through a wetland area, to the point where once you get towards the end of the park, the ditch seems to flow pretty freely, it's pretty stable and clear of debris and sediment. So this is an aerial photo showing elevations. You can kind of see where this ditch is. And this is the high point there. And you can also see, these are the photos Claudia showed before that show the stagnating water with the blue green algae. So the bottom line with this alternative is that it eliminates standing water at Old Indian Trail, both sides of the culvert. It also helps flooding for about the 4 immediate property owners in the area. The benefit is that it's relatively inexpensive and it relies on gravity drainage. Right now, the opinion of probable cost ranges from about $225,000 to $285,000 for these improvements, exclusive of potential costs for easements. So at this point, we're recommending that the city move forward with this part of the project. Also discussed during our first public information meeting and also through separate email correspondence with Claudia was the idea of providing gravity drainage along South Sayin Road all the way to Murphy's Creek. So the idea behind this would be that we could lower the elevation here at this, pick up the water, and construct a 36-inch pipe all the way to Murphy's Creek. To make this really work, because you could lower this a bit, we would back grade the drainage along Sayin Road, or sorry, along Curry Court to go back west towards Sayin Road. Those are the two primary components of this project. So what are the challenges with this project? The biggest one is that Sayin Road, south of Curry Court, has a pretty good sized hill. And here's a photo. This is a profile. This is imagining that you are standing on the west side of Sayin Road looking at the hill. So at the north end here is Curry Court, and this would be a culvert pipe that would pick up. And this blue line is the roadway profile, not the ground profile. So there would be a ditch where this culvert would pick the water up. And it's about a 36-inch pipe, and it's only at about 0.5%. And at this point, at the top of the hill near Mr. Jones's property, the hill is about 30 feet deep. So there's no way that that part of the pipe could be open cut because the houses are adjacent to the roadway. So this section of the pipe would require directional drilling at 0.5%, which is very difficult to construct. And then the pipe continues on until it intersects Murphy's Creek, and this is where it would discharge. These remaining shallower pieces of pipe could be open cut for construction. So bottom line, this is a very costly option, and it's a very disruptive construction process. I'm sure, right now the roadway is already under construction with water main improvements, and this would be a very similar type project for that open cut. There would need to be areas for pits for the directional drilling area. And one of the challenges too is that it's very difficult to get the materials for directional drilling right now, and is very expensive. And again, we're going to talk a little bit more about a second gravity alternative that goes closer to the railroad tracks. And even there's not nearly as much benefit per dollar spent. So at this point, we're not recommending it because this project is estimated to be about $2.1 million project. And it has, not only does it have a high cost, but it has a lower confidence in the constructability because of that directional drilling and that low slope on the pipe. So this is the second alternative where we looked at gravity drainage going south towards Murphy's Creek. The difference in this alternative would be that the water would be picked up and still drained to the east along Curry Court and would be conveyed with a combination of ditches and pipes along the railroad through Mr. Jones' property to the point where it would freely discharge and then drain south to Murphy's Creek. The section that would be piped, again, would also be a 36-inch pipe. Now, this again is another profile, and imagine you're standing maybe on Sayin Road looking towards the railroad tracks. Curry Court, again, this is the roadway profile of Curry Court, and we have a hill close to the railroad, but this one is only 12 feet high as opposed to 30 feet high for the South Sayin Road, and it's also not located underneath a roadway. So this is much more, has much more potential for open cut. And you could place a pipe in this section, and then you can see that the land surface very much flattens out, and drainage could be achieved with then minor ditching to the outlet of Murphy's Creek. So the bottom line for this alternative is first we have a landowner that has approached the city and is willing to talk regarding easement acquisition. It allows for easier construction, again, because it's in an open field as opposed to being underneath a roadway. And there's some flexibility, again, based on final survey and design as to how much of it's pipe or how much of it is ditch. And this has a significantly lower project construction cost. It's still substantial, but it's much lower than the directional drilling option at about $670,000 to $720,000. At this point, we're recommending further consideration, but this is definitely with input from Common Council and others. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the sump pump drainage idea. And this is not a typical thing that we see here in Wisconsin, but it is very common in other parts in the upper Midwest that were affected by glacial geology, just like the city of Fitchburg was. So the most recent, again, after talking, hearing back from people at the public information meeting, that the fact that they either don't have sump pumps or they don't run, this is what we were looking in terms of a potential collection network running on the east side of Old Indian Trail, north along Sayene Road, and then along Curry Court, and then discharging to its current discharge point towards the railroad culvert. So what does this look like? What this looks like is really almost like a miniature storm sewer system that would be located within the city right-of-way, or a stormwater maintenance easement, depending upon the right-of-way location. So the city would be responsible for the actual collection system, the PVC in the ditches, or the collecting it. But the homeowner would be responsible for the private system that connects to the public system. So, at this point, Claudia's put together a little more information, but when we first started looking at this, we're like, well, this is good because it's constructible. There was enough grade to get this constructed to protect it, or affected landowners. It could really help in this reduction of soggy ditches by giving an actual pipe for the water to flow in. And it would also help prevent this idea of recirculation that, one person is pumping water out of their basement only to have it go to somebody else's house and wind up in their basement. The thing about this is that it's a system that's really specifically targeted for groundwater influenced flooding. So the seeping into people's basements, it's not meant as a fix for surface water flooding, the things that you see during big storm events, like when Curry Court was underwater. This is a less expensive alternative. Again, it's looking at something a little bit differently. And the opinions of probable cost are a little under $200,000. So originally we said this is something that the city should think about, until we attended the second public information meeting, and there was very vocal public support, very vocal lack of public support. And in response to that, Claudia sent out a survey that went to homeowners in the area. And everybody who was surveyed, only one person suggested that they would be interested in hooking up to a sump pump collection system. If only one person is interested in hooking up to a collection system, it's not really a collection system, and it no longer is a viable option. Again, this is kind of adding on to what we talked about earlier about stormwater detention ponds, and this idea of a pond in Gold's Addition Park has been brought up several times. Back in 1955, when the neighborhood was just being developed, you can see that here in the historical aerial photo, there is a pond here. By 1974, there was the idea of putting additional roadways through here. This area was never developed, mostly because very high groundwater. There was not the ability to develop this for residential use. So the idea of building houses here was abandoned. And as you look at more current photos, this has become definitely more overgrown, and the pond has not been here at least since 1974. So the bottom line on this is that the whole idea behind putting a detention pond in Gold's Pond, like we talked, or Gold's Park, like we talked about earlier, it's downstream of where the flooding was occurring. So there's not really flood control benefit to either Curry Court or the Old Indian Trail for surface flooding. And there's, a significant amount of expense for construction, and there's potential liability, especially for a pond in an area that's out of sight, maybe out of mind, not frequently traveled. So at this point, the bottom line is this is not something that's being promoted for recommendation. So now this is something new that we looked at since our second public meeting, and this is looking at a stormwater pumping station located at Curry Park. So there are two separate alternatives, but they both behave very similarly in the results of how this would work. So the idea is that the city owns 4 lots here at the southeast corner of Curry Court and South Sayin Road, currently designated as park, but a pumping station could be constructed at this point for stormwater conveyance. And in this case, a force main, so the pumps would force water uphill through a pipe under pressure to the point you get to the top of the hill, and then the second half would be flowing downhill towards the railroad, and then eventually on into Swan Creek. And we'll talk about this a little bit in a minute. And then the second option would have a pump station of about the same size, same location at Curry Court, but in this case, the force main would run uphill. Again, the pumps would force the water through the force main to the top of the hill, where then it would transition to gravity drainage to Murphy's Creek. And this would really be on the downside of the downstream side of the roadway. So pump stations, they can look, the equipment in both of these is pretty much the same. We'd be looking at duplex pumps that would pump 6,000 gallons per minute and have approximately 125 horsepower. And the reason you have 2 pumps is because that way, if one fails, you have the other one that works in case of failure. This is one with the controls all being external, and this would likely be behind a fence for protection, or alternatively, the pumping station and all the equipment can be housed inside a building. The building, because these are all self-contained units, is not really necessary, but it's a matter of aesthetics to the city if they went forward with the pump station, what they would prefer. So what are the bottom lines? The bottom line is that the city owns the land for the pump station construction. Because the force main and the gravity sewer would be closer to the surface of the roadway, there'd be less interruption to Sayin Road. This could be open cut. Pumping to the Murphy's Creek discharge location is more feasible because there's no easement required to reach the waterway. Pumping north to Swan Creek has more complications because there's not a direct shot from the roadway to the railroad culvert, and so that would require coordination. And the thing to remember is that the costs right now, these are construction capital costs. These are not including maintenance and operation. The biggest cost of operation would be the cost of electricity to run the pumps. Maintenance is generally smaller. The pumps are generally designed to last at least 20 years and would need to be run at least once a year to make sure that they're still in good working order. But the opinion of cost for construction is around the $2.2 million mark. And the pump station would provide pretty much equal level of protection and improvement as the significantly less expensive gravity drainage option that goes along the railroad. So, recommendations, where do we go now? I'm going to talk a little bit about the high level, what we would recommend for the city moving forward, and Claudia is going to take over and talk about the implementation, about how to make that happen. So first, we had originally talked about the sump pump collection system, saying, hey, this could be done next year. The grades are there. It works. You could discharge to Curry Court. But we've taken that off the table because it's no longer recommended because of community feedback. And this really only works when you get homeowners willing to connect to the system. So the second primary thing that we're looking to recommend is the improvements to Old Indian Trail. to install the pipe along the property line after securing an easement from the new property owner, and to clean the ditches through the park. This would really have a positive benefit for the property owners in the immediate South Sayin Road, Old Indian Trail area. Secondarily, we recommend of all of the conveyance options that we've looked at, the major projects, is to go south along the railroad. And the reasons for this are that there's a willing landowner that has already been corresponding with the city and really helping to come up with ideas and willing to grant easements. Significantly lower construction costs than going along South Sayin Road or the pumping stations. There is the potential for extending the drainage system to the north side of Curry Court, especially the low-lying area that can drain to the city right-of-way. And this reduces the duration of flooding. It doesn't have a huge impact on those peak elevation floodings, like maybe 1/10 of a foot, but it definitely reduces the duration of flooding. And I've got some numbers on that a little bit later if you want to talk after the presentation. So I'm going to turn this over to Claudia for next steps.
Okay, and I'll go ahead and share my screen, Anne Marie.
I'm trying to figure out how to get out of mine.
Okay.
Stop video, no. Why can't I stop sharing my screen?
Let me see if I can just steal
I
it.
found it, got it.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so next steps here. I think it's full screen. Here we go. So I just wanted to start by showing what we currently have in the CIP for Curry Court. In 2022, we do have $45,000 in the CIP for planning, design, and engineering costs. And then in 2023, we currently have $560,000 for the construction of new or additional facilities. And so next steps for Gold Edition Park, dredging the ditches is definitely recommended. So in 2022, we're thinking we're going to go ahead and design and permit for dredging the ditches within the park. We do anticipate that there will be a longer permitting process because there are existing wetlands there. So that's a consideration in timing. And then either in the winter of 2022, like the very, very end of 2022 or sometime in 2023 is when we would be looking to actually dredge those ditches. As for Old Indian Trail, adding a culvert between Old Indian Trail and Gold Edition Park is also recommended. So for the remaining of this year, we're planning to work with the property owner who lives there to determine if there is willingness to provide the city with a public stormwater easement to install and maintain a pipe in that area. And if an agreement can be reached, allowing the city to do that, then we would certainly be able to do that in 2022. That should be a relatively easy project if we can secure that easement. At Curry Court, the sump pump collection system, as Anne Marie mentioned, it is recommended. However, there's very little buy-in from residents. Therefore, we're not recommending moving forward with that because if folks aren't tying in their sump pump to this collection system, it's effectively not going to work. Another idea that came up was redoing the ditch on the south side of Curry Court. In 2021, I'm planning to send another letter to residents to see if this is something that they're interested in. Because as Anne Marie showed with the profile, we really have a 0.6% slope average, but there are some low-lying areas. We have some areas where the supposedly upstream culvert is actually at a lower elevation than the downstream culvert. And we have some areas where ponding will occur because it's not really a straight line the entire way, which is very common when you have grades that are that flat. It's hard to grade a ditch exactly at 0.6%. So you'll see that especially with settling over time. But I do know if we went forward with removing people's driveway culverts and replacing them, at least the driveway culvert piece would be 100% assessed. So that's something we need to see if there's resident buy-in for, or if they're willing to just live with it the way it is currently. Because we don't anticipate that the ditches would dry up as a result of this project. Just to temper expectations, we would anticipate if some pumps are running and some pumps are going into the ditch is going to be wet. The ditch will be wet if people are putting water in there 24/7. So it won't make it dry, but it will improve the low-lying areas that are collecting water a little bit deeper. So if there is resident buy-in to move forward with redoing the ditch on the south side of Curry Court, understanding that there will be a portion of it that will be assessed, that work could be done in 2023 with road construction of Curry Court. And then to the east of Curry Court, we're planning to work with the resident at the end of Curry Court to see if we can agree on a new location for the public stormwater easement. And if so, we will go ahead and move forward with ditching either in 2022 or 2023, just depending on the timing of when that easement is acquired. So next steps, I guess a lot of the things that I mentioned previously, those are smaller projects with there's no silver bullet here. None of those are going to solve all of the issues that we've seen at Curry Court, but they can help improve things. One thing that we were hoping to get input from council on are these bigger ticket items, and how, if folks are just willing to share their feedback on whether or not they think the cost and benefit for particularly the Jones property alternative, because of the three costly options, that's the least expensive, and the benefit of all of these options is pretty similar. So this project, Anne Marie, if you can remind me, was in the $570,000 range or $700,000 range?
About the $700,000 range, and it would depend on kind of final survey and route location in terms of how much of it's ditch and how much of it's a 36-inch pipe.
And it lowered peak elevation flooding by 1/10 of a foot.
Right, and the real difference comes in the fact that it keeps water draining more quickly in terms of.
And can you quantify? Like,
I can, if I go back to my, let me see if I can figure out how to minimize this. Can you go down a few slides? I think this should be in your slide too. Go. Keep going.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we did, if you look at the map before, if you remember those splotchy maps that showed where the water was and how deep it was getting, I kind of broke this into two different areas because depending upon the alternative, it really was affecting different areas. So the ones that we're really talking about are better for the Curry Court area. And so that's the area outlined in blue. And so what I did is I looked at those output maps for all of for existing conditions and the alternatives. And I looked at 3 different points. What was the maximum flooding depth? What was the depth and the area inundated at the maximum flooding time? What was it 2 hours after the peak of the flood? And what was it at about 12 hours after the peak of the flood? So Claudia, if you can go down to the next slide. So if you look at the bottom chart for Curry Court, that area again, shown in blue, during the max time of flooding under existing conditions would inundate an area of about 7.2 acres. And the maximum depth at the peak storm time is about 3.35 feet. So now if you go to the Jones alternative, which is on the far right, now you've reduced that peak flooding depth to about 5.8 acres. And the reason that the depth is saying NA in this case is because this alternative includes like lowering some overflow elevation. So when you start looking at the depths, the elevation goes down, but the depth goes up. So I need to pull some more numbers for that. But when you look at 2 hours after the peak of the storm, under existing conditions, there's 4.2 acres inundated, and now there's only 1.09 acres inundated. So you only have about a quarter of the area flooded under this alternative after 2 hours compared to existing conditions. And then 12 hours later, instead of having 7/10 of an acre, you've got about a quarter of an acre flooded, which is, about a third of the area under existing conditions. So that's where we're seeing the improvement, is that it's encouraging consistent positive drainage, and it's getting the water out more quickly.
Okay, so so we're still looking at flooding for a matter of hours, but it's fewer hours.
Right. And it's less area, and it gets out of there more quickly.
Right. So that's kind of the bottom line there for this. You can expect the flooding depth to be a little bit less. The duration of flooding time will go down by a couple of hours. And that's what the benefit is. And I was hoping to just open it up and get thoughts from council on just kind of your judgment or input on that.
And there's a lot of information in here, and we know that. And there will be a report forthcoming in the next week or two. And we can also make this 90-some slide presentation available to you.
Thank you. And I see Julia raising your hand. Yes.
Yeah, can you remind me again which one is the Jones property alternative?
Excuse me, Julia, can we hold off on questions until after the public has had an opportunity to speak, please?
Thank you. Yes.
That's what I was waiting for. So
Thank you.
Claudia, if you indicate when you're complete with your presentation, we'll move to public, open it to the public for discussion.
Okay.
And then we'll come
sorry,
back to
and I'm moving around here. I was just going to open it up for questions. That was my last slide, so we're done now.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. If we had Mike here. I'm sorry, what? Mike said to let Julia ask her question. Okay, so he has changed his mind to speak. All right, well, is there anybody else that would like to speak? Please come on up. Yes, have a seat up front and state your name and address.
Yeah, I'm Mark Matthews. I am the owner of 5126 Curry Court, which is on the north side of Curry Court. Claudia and I have had several conversations over the last several years regarding the issues that we're talking about today. I do, in hearing the different plans, I am a little concerned that my property doesn't get addressed because the water flows and stays on the north side. We do not have ditches or culverts. It does flow into my property and then the vacant lot next to me and then to the property owner to the east of that. We talk about in these proposals taking water once it reaches that end property and trying to improve flowage there. But my concern is my property really won't get addressed. Water does not cross the road. The ditching on the south side really won't, in my opinion, address that unless we have some sort of connection there. But that's one of the concerns that I have, at least for my property. Claudia mentioned earlier in her presentation, and just to refresh your memory, the picture of the front door that was flooded, that's my property in the picture that Claudia presented in her presentation. The survey she referenced that had no responses from Curry Court owners, I am unaware of a survey and certainly would have responded to one. So I don't know if something was missed with the Curry Court owners, somehow didn't get to me, or if it came via mail, I would have seen it. If it came via email, I would have seen it. But I do not recall any survey asking for my opinion on what's being proposed, for or against. I do wonder about the property owned by the city, or the Village of Fitchburg, that is called Curry Park. It's a very low-lying area. Is it an option to make that more of a drain retention pond, and then use the Jones property to drain off of that towards the railway? I'm obviously not a engineer, but that is such a low-lying, very wet property even today, and was wondering if that is really of use to be used as a park. Considering it is already owned by the city, maybe that's a cheaper alternative to turn that into more of a retention pond. But that's to be discussed, or it's just an idea. But yeah, I'm a little, so my bottom line is I'm a little concerned about my property in particular, and not having it really addressed directly for the flooding issues we have every year, every spring, multiple times a year. My building does not have a basement. The lower unit continually gets flooded. We sandbag every year. We've had issues with septic systems, collapsing of a tank, which I do believe was contributed by flooding. And so we continue to have issues that I would like to see addressed. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Do we have anybody else that would like to speak? Okay.
One more thing I want to say, is it possible?
If you would, if you'd like, you do have another 30 seconds.
That's okay.
We are allowing
I
3
won't be
minutes.
long. I'm sorry, when it does come to special assessments, I know we talk about improvements that the benefit the homeowners. In the case here, I don't know if it's under consideration for extending the cost to those that contribute to the problem, not just the ones who benefit from it, because I feel like I'm not creating drainage issues in and of my own property, and yet I'm dealing with flooding from other properties, surrounding properties and roadways nearby. So I just want that consideration when we talk about assessing, not just assessing those that are receiving the benefit, but assessing those that contribute to the problem that's being addressed. So, thank you.
Very good, thank you. Melody, you'll have 3 minutes if,
I won't need 3 minutes.
all right, but go ahead.
Melody Vernig, I live at 2319 South Sain. Basically, my question is the same as his. We look at this map, and only the houses that are within the red square on this map are the ones that are looking at assessments. But all the houses that are up on Hilltop Road and in the Gold's Addition, all that water drains down to Sain and to Old Indian, and they're not included in any of this assessment. So if we're truly looking at the water problem, all of those people should have been included in all these public information meetings, and they should be all included in the assessment, because their water has to go somewhere, and we're all downhill from them. So I think that we need more public information meetings, and those people need to be included in this, and if there is a special assessment, that they need to be included in that too. And we're not doing a justice to them, because a year from now, they could be getting a $10,000 bill or $20,000 special assessment.
Very good, thank you. Thank you. Melody, yes. Is there anybody else who would, Mike? I do, yes. Mike, you'll have 3 minutes, so,
Good evening.
good evening.
My name is Mike Connor, 2315 South Sain, next to Melody. Some of my comments are, I guess they finally heard what we said as far as the sump pump system, which it took 3 times, but it shouldn't. Our engineering department and Public Works is supposed to be working for us, and it doesn't seem like they hear what we say very often. We just had some digging across in the field on your property, on the corner of Sain and Curry Court. And we had somebody go over and try and find out what was going on, and we got run around and didn't get an answer. So we still don't know why they dug over there. But as Mark and Melody both said, the map is terrible. Everybody that's above us benefits from what we get put through. And that's something that needs to be taken care of. The systems finally were figured out that the pump systems were gonna be too expensive. The Curry Court thing, we've been asking them to talk to this person since the last owner was there. Louis Smith, who lives on the corner of Old Indian Trail and Sain, is on vacation, or he would be here as well. He pretty much told me that we should tell you guys to drop everything, and my wife is saying the same thing, because we've lived with it for 43 years. Now, guys like Mark, I understand where he's coming from, and Scott across from him. There's water problems down there, but we do not have water sitting in our ditch. Not from our sump pump, not from anything else. The water might be sitting there when it's coming through, or the low spot that's there because of the water main being put in, and they never filled back correctly. But I just don't think it's fair to somebody like Scott when Claudia brings up something about redoing the ditch on the south side. Scott just put that culvert in because he just purchased those 2 lots. And now she wants to assess him not only that one, but the next one, which is encased in concrete. I just don't think that stuff is fair. The city owns the problem, and they don't take care of it. They come out and dig and try and get the ditch to flow. It doesn't flow. Now they want to nail us again, and that's just not fair. The thing through Mark Jones' property, I really think that the city needs to work on that, and there is a solution to that Mr. Jones has talked to almost everyone about, and I think the city needs to jump on it, which is a land transfer.
We have you at 3 minutes, Mike.
Very good.
Thank you. Thank you for your
Thank
comments. Okay, is there anyone else that would like to speak? Hearing none, I will close the discussion, and I will open it up to council. And I'll go back to Alder Arata Frada. She had the first question, and then I'll move on to Alder Herbst.
Yes,
Go ahead.
can you remind me what is the Jones property option?
Let me pull up that slide. One second. So Mark Jones's property is this property over here. And he has expressed willingness in working with the city to get an easement along the far east side of his property to install either a series of ditches and pipes so we could get gravity drainage to the south to Murphy's Creek.
Okay.
And I'd like to add too, unfortunately, the orange line shifted and that first vertical line should go more along the south border. Whoops.
It's fine. It's conceptual.
Conceptual. And may I address Mark's comment early too, that this analysis did include going to the north side of Curry Court with yard drains and extending kind of a storm sewer culvert to the north side to pick up that low-lying area.
So when you say north side, can you show us in the map where is that?
Sure.
Improve the north side drainage. So
This is actually Curry
This
Court,
is-
like,
This
Oh, there
is
you go.
Curry Court, so the north side of Curry Court.
Mm.
Improving drainage on the north side of Curry Court is what you mean. So basically installing either a ditch and or culverts, and then tying it back over here.
So so can I follow up question? So that one is one of your options.
Mhm. That's this option. This is what we're referring to as the Jones property option.
Okay. Can I ask another follow-up question about the Jones property and then?
Sure, as a follow-up to your original,
Yeah,
yes.
So this one is an option that the neighbors are okay? They have some, buy-in from the neighbors, you know what I mean?
I have not heard any objections to this option.
Okay. Okay, then I have more question, but for later.
Excuse me?
I will add more question after.
Okay.
I'm gonna give.
Very good. We'll move on to Alder.
And Randy,
Yes, go ahead.
sorry, I'm not sure. I did have some answers that I could provide to the folks who came and testified. I don't know if that's protocol to provide additional information to them at this time.
Are these
not.
questions from a previous informational hearing? Is that
No, they're the
They're
folks who testified today.
Oh, today, sure. If we move on to Alder Herbst, and then I'll come back to you, Claudia.
Claudia, two things. One, an easement along the Jones property, I would assume we have to be far enough away from the railroad. They get, has that been taken into account? We can't be in the railroad easement. And second, have you investigated, whether we can get a discharge permit into Murphy Creek? It seems like whenever you're doing something like this, you're moving water from one place to another, you end up with environmental impact statements, and, they're very touchy. DNR is very touchy about moving water from one place to another, where it doesn't, there wasn't a natural flow before. So if you could address those two for me, thank you.
Go ahead,
And
Claudia.
Marie, maybe I'll hand that to you.
Okay, so again, yes, for the first question, we do not anticipate impacting the DOT owned corridor. Actually, yes, that's owned by the Wisconsin State Railroad Commission. And the analysis that we did, we're still very much in the feasibility study. So we were using the parcel data available from the state of Wisconsin and Dane County's topographic information. And so we know that if this were to go forward in final design, things might move 5 or 10 feet one way or another. But that was considered to stay out of the DOT, railroad ownership. And yes, the second question is, yes, we realize that this is going to require DNR coordination. It's possible that they may have an issue about the transfer of the drainage, but it's not certain. Because yes, this does drain to Swan Creek right now, and this would go to Murphy's Creek, but they are both tributary to the West Waubesa wetlands, which eventually go into Waubesa. So yes, that's definitely some conversations we would have with water reg and zoning, as well as for wetland impacts and potentially U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
They might double the cost, those studies. By the time, you'll wait a year to hear from the Army Corps of Engineers, and I'm just very concerned about that. I don't want that minimized. I don't want that minimized, I think you've probably dealt with this many times in your career and thought it would go smoothly, and you probably have some that may not get done, during your career. So just want to raise the issue.
Additional questions. I see a hand raised, but I don't know who that. Oh, go ahead. Alder Allen, would you like to?
Yes.
Go ahead. You have the floor.
All right. So I just had a couple of quick questions. One, you've kind of addressed, Anne Marie. By the way, it's been a long time. Hope you are well.
Yes, the hair's just a little grayer.
So is mine. There about 25 years ago, maybe a little longer than that, we did a study of Murphy Creek that was looking into the ecosystem, and it dealt with analyzing the invertebrates that are living there. And I wonder if we have this large flow of water going in, how that might be affected and what can be done to mitigate the impacts on that ecosystem. But the other thing that I would like to think about, and this is really for Public Works, is I think some comments that were raised tonight are important, that this water isn't all just coming from these, 15 or 20 properties that are along Cyene Road and in Curry Court, 3 dozen, whatever it is, that there's development that happened previously that happened under standards that we would never permit today. And so I do think as we look into this further, when it comes to the cost of paying for this, we need to consider perhaps creating a stormwater utility district in that area where the cost of this can be spread out over all of the properties that are contributing to the issues down there. The only other question I had is, I know you don't have historic data because this is kind of a new thing, but I lived in the building that's at the corner of Curry Court and Cyene Road back in the early 90s. And when I lived there, there were occasional flooding issues, but it's nothing like it is today. I mean, we had times when the bulb at the end of Curry Court would be underwater, but it would only be underwater by a few inches. Now it's underwater by a lot. And so my concern is that whatever we do we have the ability, do we have enough data to be able to plan for increases in water that may come as a result of climate change, say if for the next 20, 25, 30 years, so that we don't have to redo this all again once we come up with a plan that we're going to move forward with?
Okay, so I will take that in maybe one at a time. So let me see if I can share my screen here. Why can't I see the button? Oh, there, it's at the bottom. I am used to. Okay, so in terms of the climate, this is kind of an interesting one. We talked about this and we cut this out of the presentation in terms of time. But this is a really interesting graphic, and this could explain a lot about the development of this neighborhood. And what this is called the Palmer Drought Severity Index. And this goes all the way back to January of 1895, and this is printed in November 2020. And what you'll see is on the red side, those are periods of relative dryness. And when you see the green, those are wet years. And the farther it goes from the center line, the drier it is. And then you can see the longer it goes along the x-axis, the horizontal line is the longer the period. So when you look at the aerial photos, you can see that a lot of this neighborhood was started to build in the late 50s. And a lot of it was built in the early 60s. And what do you notice from this graph, but that it was really, really dry then. And now if we move forward and we look to 1990, 2000, 2010, and 2020, there is no red. There is nothing but green on this graph, and it keeps getting wetter and wetter and wetter. So this goes to kind of what people have been seeing in the neighborhood, that it's never been like this before, and it probably hasn't. So yes, these are things that I think we really do need to take into account as we look at retrofitting older neighborhoods and developing our new neighborhoods. So that's one thing. The second thing, the invertebrate study, I was not aware of that, but I would be interested in seeing it if it can be found. The one thing that's going to be key, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, it's going to take a little bit more digging, but I think it would be really helpful to know too what the relative contribution is for a 10-year storm that would be diverted to Murphy's Creek compared to the natural flow that is there now. I would, like I said, I'd need to do a little bit of digging on that. But it's my understanding, not being a biologist, that a lot of the habitat is really more of a normal flow regime dependent situation. But again, I'd be interested in seeing the study. It's available. And I'll stop sharing.
Claudia, were there any other unanswered questions?
Yeah, so I just wanted to answer some questions from the folks who testified. Mark, who's at 5126 Curry Court, he mentioned he was concerned that what we were showing did not help his property. And I do apologize, we were trying very hard to keep this to an hour. But one thing that we have talked about is putting a pipe across the road here to tie into the existing drainage system. And then basically a yard inlet on this side over here. And then if anyone, this is the property he was talking about that is low lying and is unmowable at times because water has nowhere to go. So that would provide some relief to that property. The pipe across the road would be paid for 100% by the stormwater utility. If additional piping was needed, such as drain tile to actually get the water to the structure, that would be private. So apologies, that was not included, but that was considered. He said he was unaware of the survey. It was mailed out. It was part of the public information meeting notice for the first hearing. So that's where he should have heard about it. The property owned by the city of Fitchburg. So he's talking about these 4 properties here. He was wondering if it's possible to do a pond there with gravity drainage. So one thing that we looked into as part of this feasibility study, and again, we looked into a lot of things and we just had to get it down to an hour, was where groundwater is in this area. And based on test pits that were dug, groundwater is really within a couple feet of the surface. So if we were to dig a pond in this area, it would fill with water. So it's really not going to provide any benefit. If it's already full of water, it can't provide a benefit. Melody, she was concerned about the assessment map and why only certain properties were included on that. And so when we sent out the assessment map, that was specific to the sump pump collection system, because at the time we were thinking that we would move forward with the sump pump collection system specifically. And the way that sump pump collection systems work is half would be paid by the stormwater utility and the other half would be assessed to folks who would have the opportunity to tie into that. And so that's the project that was sent out for. So sorry for the confusion on that. And that's just a groundwater issue. So that really is a localized benefit. And we wouldn't consider charging the whole drainage area for something that would be a local benefit like that. Mike Connor, he wanted to know why there was digging on the south side of Curry Court. And he mentioned that his neighbor, I believe Scott is his name, came out and talked to us and we gave him the runaround. I was very surprised by that because we had a very long conversation actually, Scott and myself. And just to give you an image of what that was, basically what we did is we hired CGC to come out and analyze the soil in this area for us. And Mark is there. Mark is the street supervisor digging out the test pits. And what I told him is that we were looking to see what types of soils are here and also where groundwater is located. And that would be used to assess the feasibility of a pond and also a pump station, the sizing of a pump station in this area. So apologies for some reason that did not get to Mike. I was not intending to give anyone the runaround, but that is what we were doing out there. He said, Claudia wants to assess people for driveway culverts. I just wanted to set the record straight that I don't want to assess anyone anything. I'm just trying to apply our policies fairly and consistently with folks. So I think those were all of the questions and clarifications that I wanted to provide.
Thank you, Claudia. Do I have any additional questions from council? I don't see any hands raised. Anything?
Yeah, I want to ask a following question.
Alder Arada, go ahead.
One of the last resident that he spoke, he mentioned about the land transfer. What is about that? With Mark Jones' proposal?
I believe Anne Marie addressed that. Do you want to speak to that again, Anne Marie? We're talking about the Mark Jones property.
Yeah, but he mentioned about a land transfer. I don't know.
I don't think we addressed that specifically. I think there's been mention, and this would be more of a city issue, of the idea of swapping some of the land at Curry Park for land he's currently farming, but I don't know if there have been any serious discussions about that. That'd be a question for Claudia and or Bill, I believe.
Yeah, so I wasn't sure if he was talking about a public easement over Mark Jones's property or land transfer, but one idea that had come up is, let me share my screen again. Swapping some land of Curry Park in exchange for getting an easement over Mark Jones's property. And what I said to him at the time was, let's get through this feasibility study, because obviously I can't decide whether or not the city is going to do this land transfer, but I think we need to have all of the information in order to make that decision. And if we have this property, we can use it for a pump station or a gravity alternate to the south on South Sayin. And if we don't have this property, that limits some of our options. I think at the end of this feasibility study, we have come to the conclusion that the options we were looking at for this, for putting on Curry Park, are not very feasible. So at least in my opinion, some sort of land swap negotiation could make sense.
Okay, does that answer your question, Julia? Any additional questions? Hearing none, we will move on to the next item. And under 7A, announcements for the next committee of the whole meeting will be October 27th, 2021. Since we are at the end of the hour and the end of our presentations, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
Move for adjournment.
Second.
I have a second from Alder Maldonado. I'll open up for discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
We are officially adjourned at 8:55 p.m. Thank you.